Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your boy, Head Coach Ross of the Attacks Gym, Street Warrior, Njia Uhuru Kipura. As you know, Njia Uhuru is a Swahili term. It means the way of freedom. Kipura is the name of the ancient fighting system from the Congo and popularized by the Empire of Congo, which includes in its range of kingdoms, that is the empire over the kingdom of Ndongo Matamba, which later became miscalled Angola, as well as a series of other kingdoms like Shongo and Soyo, etc., so on and so forth. Okay, as you know also, Kipura is the correct term that was mispronounced, misapplied, misunderstood, and still incorrectly promoted and culturally misappropriated by Brazil as capoeira. Okay, now, what started this video? What's the purpose of this video? The idea of this video circles around footwork, and it's in response to some questions and some discussions and debates online. Okay, here's some real simple truths about footwork and some of the misconceptions. First, a lot of people don't know the difference between what a footwork and a maneuver is, and they use the two interchangeably in their discussions when they're not the same. All right. Footwork refers to foot movements that one sees in a variety of activities, including stuff like sports and dancing. Okay, whereas maneuvers refers specifically to a movement or series of movements requiring skill, focus, and care. Okay, so footwork would be something like a shuffle step. Okay, whereas a maneuver would be something like Inyani Rahisi, which you in cardio capoeira miscall the hole, you know, or some similar type of movement. Footwork would include a cross step. A maneuver would be something on the order of the Ngoma ya Udanganyifu, which is in Swahili means the dance of deception, but which cardio capoeira heads miscall Ginga, not knowing that Ginga is a person, actually, not a footwork, and that her footwork, her maneuver, is actually specific to her interpretation, like the Ali shuffle bears Ali's name, and her movement is not at all the basis for the footwork and maneuvers of Kipura, in the same way that the Ali shuffle is not the basis for all footwork and maneuvers in boxing. The pivot is a maneuver. The pivot, you know, when you pivot one direction here, pivot, that's a maneuver. Okay, it's a simple maneuver, but it's not easy because there's a variety of combinations that you put together. Think of it this way also. A maneuver can also come when you string together several different forms of footwork patterns. So these things are not interchangeable. Now, how is that important to the discussion regarding footwork? Because there's a whole series of things, you know, that impact intimately the discussion. And you have to know them first. You have to know the component parts, the facets, before you have the discussion, which requires proficiency in the component parts, you know, prior to engaging the whole. Footwork, regardless of stance or posture or system that you're in, footwork's primary purpose is to move your stance or posture as efficiently, effectively, non-telegraphically, and usually as unpredictably as possible from one point to another. That's the purpose of footwork. Maneuvering is the same purpose, very much the same goal, but maneuvering also includes in its functional definition and application the ability to negotiate obstacles, people, trees, parked cars, whatever. And it also requires you to even drive cars. Like if someone could drive a car well, they can maneuver the car, maneuver the truck well on the street into parking. Those are maneuvers. All right. So you have to have all of these things in mind and understand their interrelatedness and their differences. Now, I tied footwork and maneuvers to stances and postures. You know, and I said that in general, you have to know the stances and postures, and know that the maneuvers and footwork's purpose is to move your stances and postures from one point to another as efficiently and as effectively as possible. I stand by this general definition. It's very accurate, and it's also very impactful when you're talking about Kipura, miscalled capoeira, and my Injia Uhuru Kipura, my family's version of Kipura, and anything else you want to talk about. Now the discussion moves on to stances and postures. Your stances, your postures, the purposes of your stances and postures are guided by the philosophy of the sport or fighting system that you're engaged in. Okay? The same philosophies, which tend to differ in their specific incarnations, but agree in their general definitions. That same philosophies also impact the nuances, the specifics of particular footworks. So you can look at, say, how Sugar Shane Mosley, if you know anything about boxing, all right? And I know that boxing is a sport. It is not the self-defense practice, and that's of supreme importance when we're having this discussion. But I'm purposely using specifically the sport interpretation of boxing because it has a larger modern audience, and most people have seen some version of it, so they have some familiarity with what I'm talking about. If you've seen Sugar Shane Mosley do his footwork, and if you haven't, hit Sugar Shane Mosley on YouTube and you see it, and you see Floyd Mayweather do the same footwork, you see that there's a difference in their execution. They're both extremely good, very effective, very fluid, etc., so on and so forth, but the particulars of the philosophy of their training, of their personal training, the way in which their personal coaches taught them to do specific things, and their stances impact directly how they execute the movement. So Sugar Shane Mosley tends to be tends to be much more squared up in his stances. Floyd tends to employ, the Kobe Ingao, which means tortoise shield in Swahili, and which is the root and the basis for the knowledge of the application of the technique, which became known as the Philly shell later. Yes, it came from Africa. So this stance impacts the specifics of their maneuvers, because even though each of them want to move in such a way wherein they can't be hit by their opponent, but they can easily hit their opponent, their stances, their orientation, the bend of their knees, their breath, the angles of their steps, all of these things impact exactly, precisely how they will make each step. They will execute the same step, just from a different stance. And this gives a different visual perspective, because the stance is different, okay? So, and you have to make these micro adjustments and understand these things. This is, again, where the supremacy of application makes all the difference. All these cats who are running their mouths about footwork don't have any videos of them actually doing the footwork. I'm talking especially you cardio capoeira heads, who are engaged in this particular discussion. Especially guys like Jason Lee Bird, aka Kosan Amen. These guys mean well. They really do. They mean well. But they're not knowledgeable, they're not functional. Therefore, the kind of discussions they have are indicative of their ignorance. And yet, they present themselves as if there's some form of authority or bastion of knowledge, in these kind of discussions. They're not. And this is a general truth across all cardio capoeira, whether it's cardio capoeira Angola, cardio capoeira regional, moderno, Brazil, it doesn't matter. It's cardio capoeira, period. And the footwork is extremely dysfunctional insofar as any form of self-defense is concerned. There was also a question that was asked of me regarding the similarity and differences between boxing and Muay Thai footwork. And I will say once again, you're conflating the discussions here. We're talking about self-defense footwork, stances, postures, etc., so on forth. And as a illustration of the point that some of you are making, you brought up sports footwork. They are not the same. And there are areas in which there are some similarities, namely when you're attempting to do what the sport is attempting to do. Meaning, if you're oriented toward modern boxing, then you're primarily oriented toward hand blows, pivots, push-offs, stuff like that. All right. If you're oriented toward modern Muay Thai, which is different than Dutch kickboxing, etc., so on and so forth, then your stances will, in philosophies of that particular form of training, will reflect that general approach of training, but it's not the same as self-defense. Self-defense boxing included not only kicks, but also Greco-Roman style wrestling, joint locks and chokes, and headbutts, and biting, and eye gouging, and hair pulling. They call that rough and tumble. All right. So, and self-defense, essentially what we call kickboxing, not only included everything we talked about in boxing, but included a wide array of open hand techniques, weapons, grappling of all forms, including ground fighting, and the necessity to engage and escape your prey, meaning run. All right. So, and also concerns dealing with the battlefield. These things are very different than what you're facing in sports. While there are some core similarities, the environment under which one performs makes all of the difference. The goals and the purposes for each one make all the differences. In sports, you're trying to win points. You're trying to vanquish your opponent according to a specific code of conduct and points, associated with it that determine who's the winner and who's the loser. In self-defense, your purpose is to not lose. You do not want to lose. You don't want to get hurt. You don't necessarily have to defeat your opponent, but what you do have to do is not get hurt. That is the mandate in self-defense. Let me switch my phone over here so my finger doesn't get in the way. All right? In warfare, you're seeking to destroy the opponent's army, the opponent's capacity to wage war. So we're looking at different things here. And these are things that we really need to understand prior to engaging in conversations and making these blanket statements. All right? That also explains, once again, let me give you an example of an art, of 3 arts, self-defense arts that employ punches and kicks. Let's go with Kempo. Let's go with, say, Choi Li Fu. And let's go with Dambe. Okay? All 3 of them have distinctly different stances, postures, and maneuvers, as well as a wide variety, a central core of similar stances, blows, etc., so on and so forth. Why do they have a central core that is similar? Because the central purpose is similar, self-defense. Okay? Now, why are their differences so marked and specific? Well, again, that deals directly with the philosophies of each of these fighting systems as they became, especially the Oriental and Asian, Asian fighting systems came under attack due to politics. And in order to justify their continued practice in existence, each practice of the self-defense art had to distinguish themselves from the other. So all of the arts, African and everybody else, started off with a complete set of self-defense skills. Ground grappling, ground fighting, they're not the same. Weapons, striking of all forms, multi-fights, all that good stuff. But as time passed and politics was engaged, each of these particular systems were threatened with destruction because the civilian government was afraid of the warrior class and didn't want the warrior class to take over the civilian government and subject to the civilians in general to perpetual military governance. So, in order to allay the fears of the citizens who did seize control of power and were looking to disband the military at various points, the military practitioners and the practitioners of the warrior arts had to justify their specific purposes, the benefits that the average citizen can get from practicing their warrior arts. And this is where the need to distinguish one branch of the same general expression from the other came about. And that was also where the driving impetus towards sportification happened. So this is vital information you have to have and you have to know before you even engage in these conversations and start conflating terms as if they're the same thing. They are not the same thing. And you need to know this and understand this and respect these differences before you can have a fruitful, meaningful discussion. Now, with that being said, And I know something about conflating terms because, as you notice, as I said in one of my previous videos, dealing with the scientific basis for people being born gay, literally born gay by nature, I was conflating sex and gender, and they are not the same. And my father, who holds his doctorate in psychology and whose doctoral thesis dealt with this area, was the one who told me about it and corrected my mistake. And I passed that information on to you. Well, this deals with the improper use of conflation of terms, footwork, maneuvers, self-defense practices, sportive practices. They're not the same thing. And their goals are different. So be cognizant of this and apply this knowledge to your discussions. Okay? Regarding the practices we see in cardio capoeira, short version, everything about it is dysfunctional. And nothing about it is what our ancestors did. The proof to that, as I said to you before in a previous video of mine, is that if they were doing anything like the African practitioners of Kipura, the legendary warriors themselves, were doing, then they would continue to produce legendary warriors. But instead, shortly after the art of Kipura had been diluted and bastardized and was forced to devolve into the insult that is cardio capoeira today, the great names of the art vanished. The last two that were even well known was Mestre Pastina and Mestre Bimba, and neither one of them were the best fighters and warriors of their era. They weren't even close. They were good, but they were nowhere near the best. They weren't close at all. There are people in the sportive arena and in self-defense who are much better than both of them, and we know them. We can call their names out, like Sata, like Visuru, like Valdemar Santana. Any one of those three, just off top, would have rolled both of those guys up. And that's not disrespecting them. They're still great, fantastic, magnificent, but we need to be aware of this history so that we can have a proper grasp of the arts we're talking about and understand the anteriority and superiority of Kipura over cardio capoeira and the malicious purposes that undergird and define and propel the entire movement of cardio capoeira, just like the malicious purposes that define, undergird, and propel and direct the malicious and destructive and racist and intolerant and all-around horrible government of Bolsonaro in Brazil, and the hashtag hairpiece in chief, aka 45, aka Rump, who is president here in the United States, where I live. All right, hopefully this way too long rant has been helpful for y'all. Hey, listen, we really need your support. Come to my website, which is at googlesites.com/Attacks Gym Street Warrior Capoeira. And please subscribe to my YouTube and hit the bell, the notification bell, so you can see each one of my videos will come up. Have any questions or comments, you know what to do. Leave it at the end of this video. You know, tell me how stupid I am or how brilliant I am or whatever. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. You have a beautiful day, all right? Take care of yourself. Hey, how you doing, man? All right, all right. Asante sana. Amani. Ashe.